So, Peter, please share with us whatever you'd like to about Bill Monroe's other music.
Well, I was playing mandolin for Bill Keith after he left the Bluegrass Boys. He came back to Cambridge, Massachusetts, and hooked up with Jim Rooney, who later, of course, produced a lot of John Prine stuff, and Nancy Griffith, and Iris DeMent. And back in those days, Jim was playing guitar, singing beautiful bluegrass songs. He did, in fact, a version of Pretty Fair Maiden in the Garden, and he did a version of Moonshiner as a kind of a waltz that was always a beautiful rendition. And then Jim and I were in Ireland, and I heard the way Irish guys were singing the Moonshiner at a party. You know, I mean, it's beautiful, the one-on-one epic ballad kind of moment, but at a party, there's a lot of strong voices raised in song, and I thought the Moonshiner could be a great bluegrass type of, I mean, not just a ballad, but so I recorded it with Trina O'Donnell and Ricky Skaggs, Jerry Douglas, who else was on that? I think Sam Bush, Eddie Adcock was on it. It was my first bluegrass record in 1981, my first solo bluegrass record. And I was so happy at that time because when I left Bill Monroe in '68, nobody wanted to hear about bluegrass. But by the time I came back to Nashville in '74, just 6 years later, Alan O'Brien and Roland White, everybody was out playing around town, and bluegrass was kind of the music of all the places where people played. There wasn't that much country music, maybe downtown, but that gave me a lot of confidence, and the way everybody had grown as players, you know, and there was a new crop. You know, Ricky Skaggs and I recorded some together, and then Jerry Douglas and I, and well, finally when I moved back in '84, I was able to continue on and do the music from that recording, which had a lot of Irish influence in it, and Mark O'Connor, Jerry Douglas, and I, and it was a kind of a rebirth moment. But back to Bill Keith. You see, when I was working with Bill as his mandolin player, Bill Keith, before I joined Bill Monroe, he had been a bluegrass boy, and we used to talk a lot about Bill Monroe, a big subject, right?
Oh,
We're
yeah.
still talking about it. And he said, you know, he would talk about, Bill Keith said that Monroe would talk about his other music. And he never let on what it was. He never let on. So I had that in my head, and while I was a bluegrass boy, I would bring it up, you know, and it would be like a mystic conversation. It would be like, would it have a guitar? Well, it might have a little guitar. Would it have a banjo? No, banjo wouldn't be in that music, you know. Would it have a violin? Maybe it could have a violin. How about a dobro? No, not a dobro, but a slide guitar with no speaker on the guitar, resonator. Slide guitar, he said. And I said, why don't? He said, it would be the most beautiful thing you ever heard. It would be the most beautiful. I said, why wouldn't you want to make that music? And he said that it was because he didn't want to disappoint his fans. He was, you know, loyal to his bluegrass fans. And bluegrass, as innovative as it was, and as busting wide open the possibilities to perform live with a high-powered sound like that, you know, that was his vehicle. But he always talked about his other music, and I guess I could segue into this recording we're going to play for you, which has the same melody as Kentucky Waltz. only it was recorded in Honolulu, Hawaii in 1915 by John K. Almeida with the young vocalist Geneva Kiave. And one of the backgrounds of Hawaiian music was that the royalty had engaged a man named John Berger, who was an Austrian-German band leader, orchestra leader, and they brought him to Hawaii, and he taught all the young musicians, all the street musicians, and introduced, choir singing, because the Hawaiian people had for centuries been under the thumb of a kind of priesthood where the chanting was only done by certain people, and if you chanted the melody, that was wrong and all. It was an ancient kind of kingship, tribalism, But King Kamehameha put an end to all that. He said, no, you're going to give your land to the people, and so the royalty of Hawaii, David Kalakua, who is known now as the Merry Monarch, started instituting these festivals, hula festivals. Now, hula was a sacred dance, but he wanted the Hawaiian people to share in their own culture. As what was happening was the modernization of Hawaii in the 1890s. And then you had the American interests, the Dole pineapple people, and the sugar people, the sugarcane people. And it was a rich market at the time because it was a market directly accessible from our west coast, whereas the other places, well, the Philippines too, sugarcane, and well, look, American expansionism really was what was going on, and they took over the Hawaiian government, and they required loyalty oaths from everybody who was going to be in the Royal Hawaiian Orchestra or the Royal Hawaiian Band. And the leader of the Royal Hawaiian Orchestra was named Makea, and he wouldn't sign the loyalty oath, so he got together and put probably the first traveling Hawaiian string band show. And they moved to Portland, Oregon. They played all over the United States, and that's also at the same time, a little bit later, that Jimmy Rogers had co-wrote songs with Hawaiian musicians and had a Hawaiian slide guitar player, acoustic slide player in his band. And Makea went to the Martin Company and asked them to build him a big guitar for more resonance. And that's when they started building the D28. Yeah. And the D28 originally was a lap, a slide guitar. And they marketed Makea's design under the Ditson Company. And they kept their version of the guitar as a kind of like a orchestra model or a triple O size. But then they, the popularity of that big guitar proved so immense that they started building the D28, the Dreadnought, And in 1915, American Continental record companies found a gold mine in Hawaiian music. And of course, a lot of people have heard of Saul Hu'upi'i, who played the resonator. He played everything. He played a straight guitar, no resonator. I don't even know if he did play a resonator or a dobro or anything like that. But he did play electric guitar too before he went strictly into the religious music. And even then he played beautifully, hymns on the steel guitar. So the origin of the steel guitar and the origin of the D28 are definitely Hawaiian. And, it's been a big nourishment for us eager immigrants ourselves from the other sides of the world to play these instruments and play music that's directly related to the innovations of Hawaiian musicians. And I think that John Berger, being Berger or Berger from Austria, had a lot. He taught a lot of classical orchestrations to the Royal Hawaiian Orchestra. And so when Makea went on the road and asked Martin to build the first D-28, his repertoire would have been, you know, everything from, you know, classically oriented pieces to, you know, good old rough and tumble, you know, some of these tunes like Tome Tome, you know, Drink Drink, and, you know, good timey Hawaiian hula music, a lot of that. And so somewhere along the lines, Bill Monroe, now this is where I'm not sure, because I don't think Bill Monroe wrote Kentucky Waltz. According to Neil Rosenberg's book, somebody else had written that song or brought it to Bill and maybe got his name on it. I don't know how that happened. But it seems to me that if this person wrote the words to Kentucky Waltz, he was channeling Bill Monroe for sure. You know, so Bill may have been the lyricist, but the melody definitely comes from Hawaii, and it may have come from a German, you know, classical piece. Ba da 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 da. You know, it's so many tunes just like that. You know, kind of like the lilting serenades and things like that. And that's the stuff that the Royal Hawaiian Orchestra played all the time. So we should listen to the original recording of the melody of Kentucky Waltz, and the tune is called Pua Lilia, which is a white flower, and in the song the singer addresses his love as the white flower whose perfume draws him to her. Or him. Me about the story I heard from Ronnie McCurry, because Bill was a dancer, the WLS barn dance, when he and his brothers left Kentucky and went up to Detroit, Chicago area, where there was work, and they worked in the oil refineries, mostly just stacking big old barrels of, or preparing the barrels. It was all manual labor in those days. There were no machines. And so the Monroe brothers and Bill would be working in the yard of the petroleum company, getting the barrels ready to be filled, and this and that, or maybe putting them on the trucks where they would be filled and then taken to, I mean, think of it, there were no pipelines, right? But Lake Superior was a huge, terminus for freight, oil freight. I mean, really, the whole Great Lakes area went from being Lakota Sioux Nation country to being, vibrant urban growth of American economy. Of course, right in the middle of all that happened the Great Depression. So, you know, a seaport in Chicago, would imagine that, a seaport within the United States. They would trade with Europe going up through Canada, and the Sioux Indians themselves traded with the Canadians, the French Canadians, especially up in Montreal, and they would take their furs and canoe them up through the Great Lakes all the way up through the St. Lawrence River. And you know, music is the same way. Music follows the trade routes, you know, and you know, we've all probably eaten our first taco before we ever heard any Spanish music, but, you know, or Arabian music for that matter, because Arab music was present in Spain for centuries. We were going to talk about something, but I have drifted too far from the shore.
Maybe Bill Heron, the Hawaiian duo?
Oh yeah, well, Ronnie McCurry. Of course, we all love to talk about the origins of these things, and Ronnie McCurry thinks that while Bill was a dancer on WLS, he heard there was a Hawaiian band on that show, and I think it was a duo, but of course they would probably had members coming and going. I think they were called Bill and Bob, the Happy Hawaiians or something. And Ronnie thinks they may have heard, they may have played that song Pualilia, and Bill may have heard it there. But I also think that, you know, the Monroes, one of the things they had was a Victrola. That's one of the things that Bill had as an advantage over other people, is he heard music that had been recorded from the earliest parts of the 20th century. And it's quite possible that the craze for Hawaiian music drifted as far as his own parents' record collection, you know. And this was not Edison things. This was actually vinyl in a console. And I do believe that's an established fact, that the Monroe family, that was a big thing. They had a console. They had a Victrola or something like that. So that meant they listened to records. And so Bill, as the young Bob Marley, one of the things that Bob Marley credited to his vast knowledge of music was he heard so much music on the radio, especially when he worked up in Delaware, where his mother was living at the time. And he listened to this pop music, he listened to soul music, he listened to country. In fact, Jamaica, they'll tell you down there that country music was the foundation of reggae.
Wow.
Which, you know, and it's not like, again, people think Bill Monroe sort of stumbled upon things, and they think the Jamaicans were like, oh, they turned the beat around because they didn't know how to play or something. No. They were having fun with music like we all do, you know? Yeah. And so these innovations just were so catching, you know? Yeah. Bill innovated the double backbeat driving bluegrass, you know, the Rastafarian chant music with American country music influences became, you know, instead of the bass going doom, 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 the bass went, you know, doom, doom. Cut the bass line in half, and still the rest of the rhythm is moving, you know? No, there's wonderful things like that. So wherever Bill may have heard Pualilia, or the person who brought him the tune, because that I'm not clear on. Maybe Neil Rosenberg can clear that up. It was, I believe I read that it was brought to him by a third person, somebody who brought Bill the tune. But in those days, you know, Bill suddenly got a picture of how the publishing worked, and he put his name on a lot of tunes. Mm-hmm. And he wrote tunes and put another name on the tunes, mm-hmm. so that his own royalty base would be broadened, and his tax reporting might be a little creative. You know? But yeah, so possibly the WLS Barn Dance had that Hawaiian band, you know, but these are all the lore, you know.
Yeah. Should we give them a little Kentucky Waltz Bluegrass style?
A little of the old Kentucky Waltz.
Cool.
2
We were waltzing that night in Kentucky beneath the beautiful harvest moon, and I was the boy that was lucky, but it all ended too soon. As I sit here alone in the moonlight, I can see your smiling face. Now I long once more for your embrace and that beautiful Kentucky waltz.
Play that all day.
Oh yeah.
You know, really, it's just so many beautiful chord substitutions. I can barely scratch the surface.
Thank you, Hawaii.
Thank you, Hawaii.